Back here on Busted Open, Dave LaGreca, Mark Henry, 844-796-7874. We will get back to the busy phones in just a second, but I wanted to give a shout out to our good friend Jim Ross, Mark. And we talked a lot yesterday about the G1 special from the Cow Palace on Saturday night and New Japan coming to San Francisco, and it was one hell of a show. And we weren't sure if it was pre-planned or not. I didn't think it was. You didn't think it was. And now we know for sure it wasn't. But during that Jay White, Juice Robinson match, you know, Jim Ross, the table got knocked over. Jim Ross, you know, fell.
Well, he got slammed into him first before it flipped over.
Yeah, it did not look good. And he sustained a rib injury. And it's a little bit more serious than we first thought. And you know, he has a rib injury. It's affected his lungs, and doctors are, you know, concerned that it might, you know, contract pneumonia. So he's got to be very, very careful. But right now, Jim Ross is in a lot of pain. It hurts when he yawns, he coughs. It's been very, very difficult for Jim Ross. And, you know, Jim Ross has gone through a lot, man. And, you know, they get injured in that way when he's focused and concentrated on doing a job. We just want to send some well wishes to good old JR, our good friend Jim Ross.
That's right. I mean, Jim, if you're listening, man, like prayers are up for you. And, you know, just get better, man.
And Jim Ross, and listen, and I don't understand why, Mark, you watched the G1 special on Saturday night. You know, he's gotten a lot of criticism from those New Japan fans about his call of the show. I thought he was spot on. I thought he was very good. And after taking that tumble, and like you said, getting hit by that table, you know, to go back, finish that match, and then do the main event on top of that as well. I mean, the man's a trooper. And you know, I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'll keep saying it. He's the best voice in the history of pro wrestling. And I listen, everyone has their opinion. I understand. We are too. We're critical of certain things, but there comes a word, and that word is called respect. You got to be respectful towards somebody like JR. And to be able to do what he's doing at his age and still be at the top of his game, you know what? He has my respect, and that's why I think he's the best ever.
You know, he'll be the first one to say Gordon Soley was the best.
And he does. And Gordon Soley's right up there, too.
You know, and, you know, Mean Gene Okerlund, and the list goes on of people that have called wrestling at a high level. Michael Cole is, you know, working his way to the top of that list. But I really do look at Jim Ross as being the guy. Like, I mean, from the Slobberknockers to oh my God, Katie bought a door. That man's got a family. Like, I mean, all of the catchphrases, but it's more than that. It's the way that he puts everything on the table and the presentation of making that wrestler that he's talking about look great. And as much as we're into the show, we are listening to what they say.
Absolutely.
And I several times Jacob will be screaming and I'll go, shh, 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 shh. I want to hear what he's going to say. You know, it's like Jacob's like, shh, shh, shh yourself. And I'm like, come on, man. Like, I got to hear this. Like, and that's lovely to me, to be able to get that extra insight from somebody that's been around for 40 years and really knows how to make the call. And, you know, it just adds so much to the industry.
And we talk about New Japan and their expansion into the U.S. and them on Access TV. Listen, I think Jim Ross being a part of that commentating team, you know, it really has helped the expansion of New Japan.
It has.
It really has, because people are familiar with that voice. They're comfortable hearing that voice, and it brings a credibility to a product that a lot of people didn't know until it came to Access TV. And I'm sure there's a lot more people that are watching New Japan Pro Wrestling because Jim Ross's voice is on that show.
And he's able to give insight to wrestlers that nobody ever heard of before. And that's where he's paying real dividends, is he's able to explain who these guys are that you've never seen or heard.
Yep.
And man, he's doing a tremendous job. He's going to be missed while he's recuperating.
And Mark, you and I talked about it, as much as we loved that G1 special on Saturday night, Jim Ross was very critical of the officiating. I like that. I like that fact that that brings that realism to pro wrestling. Jim Ross has always been able to do it. He's been able to tell a great story, always. And like you said, all the decades in the history behind Jim Ross, dating back to Mid-South. Go to the WWE Network, watch some of those Mid-South shows with Jim Ross, and then watch World Championship Wrestling with Crockett Promotions and hear Jim Ross. And then with WCW and the WWF and now WWE and the work that he's done with New Japan. I mean, he has my respect. I love Jim Ross. And I have said it, my all-time favorite match is the I Quit match with Ric Flair and Terry Funk. And the reason for that, more so than what Ric Flair and Terry Funk did in the ring, is that it was Jim Ross and Gordon Solie on the call. Think about that.
Wow. Jim
Ross and Gordon Solie, the two greatest voices in the history of pro wrestling. I truly believe that. But my number one is Jim Ross. So, if call in with your memories, and also tweet. Give a little, thank you to Jim Ross and a little well wishes to Jim Ross, because you know what? He deserves it.
You know what? I one of the things that stands out to me about him being on New Japan is sometimes Jim is not always at the shows. He's seeing it like we see it.
Yep.
And that would be so difficult to call a show and not actually be in the building. How good do you have to be able to watch from a screen and call a show and it be just hot fire? The dude is super talented.
Yeah,
he's
super
beyond
talented.
Super talented. And his understanding is prolific. There's no other way to put it. There's nobody else in the industry, even right now, who is making the calls from the analytical standpoint as Jim does.
And I put Jim Ross, Mark, and you're a big sports fan and you follow all the different sports. I put him with, a Pat Summerall and a John Madden and a Vince Scully. Like, that's where I put somebody like Jim Ross. To me, he's that iconic.
He is. And you don't think for 1 second that Jim couldn't call football or basketball?
He definitely could.
He could call it. He would call it like he sees it, and he would add that extra. This guy trains in the off season and he just goes and he knows everything about everybody, and he's not looking from a book. It's not written down. Like, the dude is just talented.
And speaking of books, his book, Slobberknocker, is fantastic. His story, how he got into pro wrestling, what he did in Mid-South, his relationship to Bill Watts, his relationship with Jerry Lawler, his relationship with Vince McMahon, and he's honest about his relationships outside of the world of pro wrestling. That's definitely a book you definitely want to take a look at.